MIT Enterprise Forum, Washington, D.C., and Baltimore created a free online event for our first installment of our Back to Biz series. As part of our effort to improve lives through innovation and entrepreneurship, this online series is intended to facilitate bringing back business safely after the pandemic. First up on June 4th, 2020, was the future of wine and technology. Just how much has this pandemic changed the way we drink? Our distinguished panel had an engaging discussion that upped one's wine education while dipping into the tech side of the wine business, a business ripe for technical disruption. We explored issues affecting the customer-facing demand side of the wine business, including how technology is moving the sales, distribution, accounting, and education of the grape online and into the cloud. We discussed how technology and analytic tools transform massive volumes of environmental sensor data into crop management decisions. And we looked at our changing climatic conditions and how wine entrepreneurs combat known weather conditions and the more recent extreme conditions. Our chapter chair, Cynthia Traeger, organized and hosted this event. Our panel featured 3 wine industry entrepreneurs. Chris Parker, who is serving as our moderator, is the co-founder of Virginia Wine and Spirits Academy. VAWSA is a premier wine and spirits education trust approved program provider located and certified in Virginia. David Ebert is a co-founder of Vinsense. Vinsense software allows for precision soil mapping and provides a visual toolkit to handle massive amounts of sensor data. David is the Director of Data Sciences for the Societal Challenges Institute at the University of Oklahoma. Jeannie Whitehouse has a CPA, a CITP, and a CSPM. Jeannie works as a winery consultant for Brote Markle Davis & Company in Napa Valley. She teaches winery financial concepts as a wine industry sales education academy instructor. She writes, speaks, and tweets about finance and technology at evenanerd.com. Sounds perfect for an MIT event. We join the recorded session with Chris introducing his interest in the wine business.
Wine has been a huge part of my life since the early 20s. So I had this sort of idea that really Virginia is a wine producing region. Nobody had heard about it and it deserved to be put on the map. So I set up a company to do just that. That led into really what I'm most passionate about is storytelling and building a business around the education, wine education, the business of wine, etc. So it's been a heck of a journey since 2007. So I'm happy to be with you this evening, really to talk about what lies ahead in the future. So we're really going to touch upon a few things, technology and how it relates to more the customer-facing demand side. What's happening in terms of the consumer market, particularly now where there's a heck of a lot of disruption going on, some good, some bad. What's happening in terms of production, the viticultural side of things in the wine industry and winemaking goes back 9,000. So, how does technology play in an industry that is known for moving quite slowly? And then also the changes in climate and the impact that is having on the wine industry worldwide. Joining me on the panel today, we have 2 distinguished guests, and David is the founder or co-founder of Vinsense, as also the globally professor of is that electrical and computer engineering, David?
It
is good. And computer science, associate vice president of research and partnerships, and director of the Data Sciences for Social Challenges Institute at the University of Oklahoma. I'll leave David to talk about the business of Vinsense and the software and the technology, but needless to say, David's focus is on the viticultural side of things, what's happening in the vineyard, really getting more precision around the data that's needed to make the right decisions, because that's really where quality winemaking starts in the vineyard, starts in the field. So the more information that we have to make better decisions, if we're gathering it when we need it and using it when we need it, it makes a huge difference. So that's an area that David Ebert will be focusing on. We're also joined by Jeannie Whitehouse, and Jeannie's a CPA. She divides her time between working as a winery consultant in the Napa Valley and writing and speaking and tweeting about finance and technology. Now, so Jeannie will be focusing more on the broader business aspects of financing and technology and the operations of the winery industry. She also teaches winery financial concepts at Wise Academy. So let me start by talking a little bit about the broader aspects, because if you think about winemaking around the world, that there are two bands in latitude, northern southern hemisphere, where wine or grape growing is known. It's 30 degrees to 50 degrees north and 30 degrees, 50 degrees south. So if you think of all the wine regions of the world, it's France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Australia, New Zealand, California, and then you go into the southern hemisphere, Argentina, Chile, etc., South Africa. You've got wine being made around the world, so it's a major industry, $300 billion industry, very complex, because now wine is being distributed around the world. So how the wineries navigate and produce their wines cost effectively, how distributors are moving that wine around the world and eventually getting it to the consumer in their chosen markets. It's been a pretty staid and predictable market over the years. It's both a commodity, it's an alcoholic beverage, it's a lifestyle. More and more people are looking to wineries as a place to visit, as an experience to have. And that certainly has been my background with the Wine Academy, where we're bringing knowledge to both the industry and also to the enthusiasts. And I will say, from a disruptive standpoint around wine education, firstly, the desire for more about wine has increased. So therefore, a winery that is not in tune with that growing body of knowledge, a distributor or a retailer that's not in tune with that growing body of knowledge, is not going to be able to serve their customer as well as they should in the future. So data, information, knowledge is absolutely critical all the way down the line. So our job is to educate and inform both industry and the enthusiasts. But the big disruptive event has been the recent pandemic. Social event, education, we're in a classroom, we're sharing tastings of wine. There's a lot of spitting going on. You're not tasting a whole lot of wine and drinking it, because if you're tasting 12 wines in an evening to do a comparative tasting, you have to spit it out. So it's not an environment that works well in a pandemic. So we've had to very quickly shift fully online. There lies a problem, because how can you have that full sensory experience? So what's happened quickly is the wine industry is set up on using Zoom, particularly Zoom. Some are using WebEx, but it's predominantly Zoom, and all of that has shifted over to online. Wineries have gone online for tasting. We are fully online in terms of education. So what that pushes is industry to think about, how are we going to package wine for tasting, for example, because we need to be able to get that out to our customers, our students. Wine needs to be distributed easily, and distribution in the US is not particularly easy. varies state by state. But there are companies like wine.com that we are working with that enables us to say, okay, these are the wines that you are going to be tasting. And we are working in partnership now with wine.com to deliver those wines consistently to all of our students, and using Zoom to deliver quality education through those technologies. We've had to move very, very quickly in the space of 2 months to make all of that happen. So that's one of the disruptive things, and I think that is going to stay. I think that is going to be a big, big shift in how education is delivered in this industry and for enthusiasts. So that's just a little bit of background. And what I would like to do now, as I mentioned, it all starts in the vineyard. The very best wines, that's where, well, all wines, that's where it starts. But the wineries that are making the best wines really understand that, and really understand that to produce a wine of quality, it's always about precision, combination of science and art. And on that note, if I could pass it over to you, David, because I think that's a good segue into your field of expertise, to talk a little bit about the role of your business and the applications in the field of viticulture.
Sure. Thank you very much. And I would even go a step farther and say it all starts deep in the soil. And to really grow good wine, you need to fully understand the soils. I'm someone who did not grow up knowing soils. I'm a data visual analytics person who's worked with people in a lot of areas, helping them take data, combine their expertise, and turn it into allowing them to take action to make themselves more effective and more efficient. And it means that we need to understand and bring the science of the underlying disciplines together. So when about 5 years ago now, when we started this idea, it came up from working with some growers in California who were dealing with unprecedented growing conditions. They were in the 4th year of a drought. They were trying to understand how they could manage their vineyards because their old rules of thumb, things that worked in previous years, were no longer working because they'd never seen these growing conditions. And at the same time, they had all these Silicon Valley tech startups saying, oh, we've got this new sensor, we've got this drone, let us fly over your vineyard, we can help you, but spend 2 weeks telling me what you do, right? They just wanted to come in, they were data analysts. Oh, we've analyzed online sales data, we can do predictions about what's going to happen in your vineyard. They didn't think about the fact that there's tons of missing data, it's very messy. No growing season is like the previous growing season. So all of the problems that are coming up to bite a lot of applications in machine learning now, of having out of data distribution situations pop up, is what growers are facing all the time, right? So you really need advanced analytics to be able to do this, but you need science basis. And so when I was working to start helping some people, I got a hold of the first person I brought in was an enologist, Christian Butska, who I'm still in Indiana because I'm about to move to University of Oklahoma. So I've been a professor at Purdue for the past 19 years. And Christian Butska is our enologist here. He had been on UC Davis faculty. He was the extension enologist for the state of California. So I knew him from our common interest in wine and the fact that he understood grape growing and winemaking problems in California. And what we did then was we reached out and brought in a soil scientist who was able to capitalize and characterize the fine grain variation and the very high complexity of soils in the wine growing regions. Now, grape vines grow pretty much anywhere. And they like to be tortured, right? A lot of old stains are tortured vines make great wines. But you really need to understand what those soils are and how they vary. And so what we started doing is helping people understand what's going on throughout the root zone what is the multi-year implication of all of the weather events and the things that they do on their operations. So we're able to take the enology and the winemaking chemistry science, the soil science, viticulture expertise, and figure out what data you need to sense and what data people collect, what's the minimal data they need to collect to really understand what's going on, get early indication and predictions of what's going to happen later in the season, and put it in terms they can understand so they can become more effective and efficient in what they're doing. Everyone wants to be sustainable, but that means economically sustainable, number one, and environmentally sustainable, number two. So it really takes that combination of art and science and relating it to the decision makers, the decisions the growers need to make, whether you're talking about from bud break to fruit set to raisin, raisin to harvest. You need different information and you manage differently. I mean, just looking at, I just pulled up soil data from a ranch in Napa Valley, a good partner we've worked with since the very beginning, Bob Bialy. He's an old-time Zinfandel producer, a great guy, and looking at what's going on with their soils there. And this spring has been one of the driest springs in probably 4 years in terms of soil moisture available. We helped them decide when to irrigate so that bud break, there'd be enough moisture in the soil so that you get the right uptake of nutrients and it wouldn't impact the formation of berries later on and cause deficiencies going down the road. But still, we're seeing very dry conditions. And so every year you've got to deal with the fact that plants adapt to what's happening and they do a 2 to 3 year cycle of adaptation. So they're constantly responding. So you need to sense about what's going on. And that's what we're really trying to do. But it is helping them deal with not only the change in climate, the change in water resources, and especially the change in diminishing labor. How can they use less labor to still become effective? Because the wine grape industry for at least 4 years has had a skilled labor shortage, and it's just getting worse.
We have a question, and I would add that any questions that anybody has, just type away, and we'll address as many of them as we can. If we don't have enough time to address them all, then we'll take a look through these and follow up after the event. But one of the questions here is what software is used to monitor vineyards? Are there proprietary packages or standard? David and perhaps Jeannie, if you have some thoughts on that.
I think that's David.
I guess I would sort of say that there's a lot of different companies out there providing software. And one of the things that we found, we have our own software. We tend to integrate any data that anyone is able to provide and work with all of the companies that put sensors in the ground to pull their data in. A lot of people go to having their own package. We try to be, data source and sensor source agnostic, but there are a lot of people out there, and some focus on different aspects. Some people are just out there to tell you when to water. There's some people who make sensors and do that. There's other people who are focused on other aspects, and a lot are focused on the accounting and business side of like, how do I account for all the amendments I'm doing, all my labor? What is the cost it's actually taking me per ton of grapes and per bottle of wine that I produce?
I second that. We're seeing people doing things like heat mapping applications. We're seeing products like Sure Harvest, which is monitoring the additions to soil and what you're doing during the process as a vineyard management company. And then we're seeing people trying to figure out how to capture all the production related and farming cost. Various levels of complexity, from small business facing solutions to the higher end stuff. In our space in the Napa Valley, running primarily on Navision software, a product from Microsoft Dynamics Nav, which has been modified for the wine industry. So we're seeing people trying to do soup to nuts cost tracking there, but not necessarily farming practices and some of the things that I know David's much more involved in. But it's challenging.
There are some interesting projects that are underway as well that are one that for example, I think it was I'm not sure if it was announced today, but it certainly is recent information of technology that's used for dealing with disease pressure and powdery mildew and other carcinogens like that is very common around the world in vineyards. So there's Cornell is working in partnership with a Norwegian company, I think, on on robotics, sending robots down in between the vines and using low UV lighting, and doing it at night, and that kills off the mildew. Now the contrast to that is because it's a labor-intensive task where if you're in a particularly damp environment, you don't have to deal with that so much in California, but if you're in a damp environment, you could be spraying 10 to 15 times. It's labor intensive. So a technology like that, robotics in the field that has a very specific repetitive task, can save millions. So there's these sort of broad scope technologies, but also those that are automating repetitive manual tasks. Jeannie, perhaps if you could talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing and the experiences that you're seeing out in with your clients.
So I'm a CPA, so we're a CPA firm that focuses on the wine industry out here in Napa Valley. So our main focus. And I think one of the parallels of what David was saying is, we can have all the data in the world, but if we don't understand what it means, it's not very useful to us. And so as David is bringing context to that visual information from the field, we're trying to do the same thing to the financial data that is being gathered in the back office. And so there are a lot of parallels. And, one of the things that we do, David, is try to keep an eye on what we're spending in the farm, because that's where a lot of the dollars go every period. And they tend to get buried many times from a financial perspective, and we're not paying attention to variations in farming cost and the cost per acre and the cost per actual case produced, which can vary greatly based on the yield of a particular vineyard. So we're trying to give context around those costs as they vary from year to year. But before I say anything else, I have to say I have so much respect for anybody who can survive in the farming world and managing against the vagaries of nature and the unpredictable challenges. I am clearly not from Napa Valley. You can probably already tell, y'all folks from Virginia, that I'm from the South, originally Greenville, South Carolina, and moved out here in this industry in 2007, and just overwhelmed by the amount of day-to-day challenges. If you're not, the farming first, but then also the managerial requirements of keeping track of all of these various businesses that come together under the umbrella of a winery. So we're talking about the manufacturing and processing, the farming components, the the sales and distribution, not only to direct to resale sales, but also to the wholesalers and distribution. And then there's just the compliance that is in place to try to make this hard on everybody who's trying to make a living. So great deal of respect and understanding and really admire the driving force that we see in most people who have a vineyard is to connect to that earth, to really make the connection to the land and to the local communities and to the earth, and to do the right thing for the global both economy and environment. And so I think it's a great place to be. The big challenges that we've seen, and again, I came out of technology, so CPA in Atlanta, left to go into technology, tried to solve the context problem around numbers with technology, and realized it requires business process knowledge as well as technology and the communication skill wrapper around all of that. So spend a lot of time trying to help people understand what all this gobbledygook we accountants produce means when it comes to really making decisions that affect the wine that you produce. But we're seeing a lot of struggles around getting data to flow from point A to point B inside the business. So we have direct-to-consumer point-of-sale systems that don't speak to accounting. We have inventory split across multiple locations, and I can't put my finger on a button and see what I have where across my organization. We're seeing national sales teams that are handling the distribution wholesale side of the business, struggling to integrate what they're doing with what everybody else is doing. And then the whole production management aspect is a big challenge. Again, separate disconnected applications for that. And then we have this whole vineyard team who's doing God only knows from our perspective over there in the, in their black box. So it's a very complex and poorly integrated set of tools that we have today. And what we're trying to help people do is bring it together somehow so that they can get real-time insights into what's going on in the business. And that is an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, JD. And we've got a bunch of questions coming in here that really tie into that very point. Is that the wineries, I mean, as with any business, it depends partly on the size of the winery. Is what is the business objective of the winery? It could be a small farm winery, much like many of those in Virginia. There are 400 of them. There are a few that are considered to be medium-sized wineries, but they pale in comparison to the size and production levels of California wineries. So what could be done from a technological perspective for some producer like Gallo that's producing millions and millions of cases a year that can implement massive changes across the board? They have the scale. Those technologies are not necessarily, although they're available, they're not cost effective. The small winery would never get the return. So there's that desire, I think, to say, okay, well, what can be done on a production level for the large organizations, but also more and more technology is becoming available to smaller wineries so that they can enjoy some of the benefits of technology. So there's a question here about IoT sensors, the Internet of Things sensors for remote telemetry, too new or the future? I mean, that's a great question, because what we're talking about is the fact that we have to get the right information into the right hands at the right time. And we hear those bells ring in many businesses, but in the wine industry, where it's such a traditional industry and has been slow moving, it is highly fragmented. So these are the things that, from my experience, I'm seeing are having the most impact, because you can implement fairly cost effectively sensors into the vineyard, be able to start collecting this information and then delivering it not just to the vineyard manager, but it becomes part of the data that the whole operation can use. And what are your thoughts on that, Jeannie?
I think that's absolutely correct. Again, right now, one of the things that we're really harping on, especially in light of what's happening in the world environment for us, is timeliness trumps 100% accuracy. And I'd rather have partially good data right now than have perfect stuff 6 months from now or a week later or whatever. So I think the faster we can get these other devices to give us intelligent insights, the better off we're all going to be. And I think that's particularly true in the vineyard. David, what are you saying there?
Yeah, and I would say there are a lot of companies and people have been deploying sensors through telemetry-based systems for a while.
A long time, yeah.
The cost is going down. I mean, it used to be that a data logger transmitter, a cellular transmitter, was $1,500, over $1,000 just for that piece of it. Now that's down under $500. It's probably about $40 worth of parts, according to my EE colleagues. Who put them together, but it's getting affordable. And if you have the science to tell you where to put it, you can start bringing that in. And if you sample right and you understand what's going on, you can do a correct statistical sample. And just there's another question about flying drones over. There's several companies, at least in the West Coast, who fly over the fields every day. They fly across once a week entire California, agricultural country, and they will sell you the images. There's always the question of, do you want images showing what's happened to the plants and then you take action, or do you want to sense it before it happens? So I tend to be someone, if you know what's going on in the soil, you can get very valuable information, and that can be a first step to do that. And they are starting to get better image processing going on to that. I'm involved with a number of other projects, like dealing with sorghum for biofuels, funded by the Department of Energy, doing very high resolution remote sensing down to 0.2 centimeters of sorghum crops to understand genome to phenome. The great thing about annual crops is actually the fact that each year you start from scratch. So every piece of variation you see is what's going on now. With the perennial crops, when you've got a vineyard that's 25 years old, I'm a former computer graphics guy, so when I try to find the patterns in the images, I try to defocus my eyes and see what's going on. But there's so much variation because there's replants, there was, you're starting to get dead arm disease on one vine or different things. So you really need to look at rate of change and things. And companies are now getting to start providing more the information product to the end user. So there's some very good companies that we've been fortunate to work with, as opposed to just, here's 50 more images. We're very fortunate to work with a vineyard manager for Francis Ford Coppola for several years, and she was sourcing grapes from 125 growers. And once a week, she was getting 125 new images. So she was looking at last week's image and this week's image, 125 of them, trying to decide, has the work that her crew's done made any difference, and what should she focus on? Now they're getting much more evolved. And so all of that is getting out there, but it really is making sure that you're enabling people to do it who aren't image processing computer science geeks, that don't understand, the difference between different correlation metrics. And we work with some great skilled growers, and the last time they had a statistics class may have been 15 or 20 years ago, and it's very easy. And then you've got people who have GIS masters working for some companies. But, as was pointed out, in Virginia, there's a lot of small growers. In California, there's a lot of small growers. I don't remember the statistic. I think it's over 90% of growers have, produce under 10,000 cases or something like that.
It's a huge number in California. Yeah.
I mean, it's
majority of our clients are small.
Yeah, it's very skewed distribution. I think it's the top 10 producers of wine account for like 80% of the market, and then it's a huge tail. And so we've worked with people from about the few hundred cases up to about 100,000, but most of them are under the 20,000 cases, so they're smaller.
Yeah. We have a couple more questions here, so I'm just anything that I think was one question earlier. Are you familiar with Microsoft FarmBeats initiative?
Yes. It's a great initiative. We've had numerous discussions with the person who's leading that. They're trying to provide a platform, Microsoft cloud platform, as a back end to integrate a lot of different things. And so, personally, we've talked about them of integrating some of our technology. Amazon doesn't seem to be as big into going after the agricultural market right now, but that's a great ecosystem of agricultural technology that they're producing.
Another question here about can vineyard work done here be reused overseas in Africa? If you, the point I made at the beginning about the bands of climate, 30 to 50 degrees latitude, northern and southern hemisphere, many parts of the African continent are just too hot to good quality. Obviously, South Africa is a major wine growing region, so there's a lot of development, a lot of hundreds of years of expertise there, and also it's a major wine growing area. But in other areas of Africa, it's interesting that when I was working on the plans to take Virginia as a region to really put it on the world stage and start educating, one of the aspects I looked at was economic development. And even in Virginia, what I discovered, that for every dollar in value, that of wine, it generates $7 of economic benefit, because there's that spin-off of other business activities, either in support of winery production or a derivative business such as tourism. So when you look at any country where perhaps there's an opportunity to plant vines and make wine, it's also an economic development opportunity. So I would say, you know, as David, you mentioned, as the cost of technologies start to drop, where we get a better understanding of soil, of climate, growing environments, then we can provide the information, you know, collectively we can provide information that will enable people to say, okay, this particular spot will be great to grow vines.
And I would just echo there that we do take a lot of research that's done overseas and apply it in the US as well. I mean, the Australian government puts a huge amount of money into dealing with climate change, dealing with dry conditions, salinity in soils, and they fund multi-year projects. The US tends to be a bit more short-sighted and do 1 to 2 year projects. So we reap the benefits of all the work funded by the Australian government. And in developing areas, we're actually, Purdue has a partnership with universities in Arequipa, Peru, trying to grow the Peruvian wine industry. There are wine grapes that made their way to North America and in California, started 200 years before in Peru and slowly worked their way up through South America and Central America into California. And so there are wineries still in existence from the 1500s in Peru. The winemaking technology and skills are stopped in the 1940s to 1950s, but there's a lot of people there, and they turn all the grapes that they grow, the majority of the grapes, into pisco, similar to grappa or an eau de vie. But it's one of the cases where there's great potential with the growing conditions that they have there if you're able to handle the drought conditions. They've got incredible climate conditions, and that's why the wine grapes that the Spanish monks planted actually grew, because you didn't have all the disease pressure, because it was a dry, irrigated Inca canals coming in to feed these fields. And so it is, it's a, you know, global economy in wine.
Yeah, that's true. Jeannie, there's a question regarding precision agriculture, saving money, saving time, but does it affect the price? What's your thought?
Well, you know, our prices are not driven by costs. We don't take costs and multiply by a factor in the Napa Valley. We look at what the market will bear and go as high as we can. I mean, that's been the approach. That was one of the shocking things to me. It was like, we don't care what it costs. Here's how much we can get for it. I mean, it's really brand driven. It's marketing driven. It's AVA, what AVA you're in. You know, there's values outside of the cost. So the pricing is rarely set based on a cost ratio, but that is not to say that the margins are not impacted by the cost. So, you know, the agricultural impact in our world, there is one word that you can say if you're in the production or farming side that will allow you to have a blank check written on your behalf, and that is the Q word, quality. If I can raise an argument and tie it to quality, then I will get whatever dollar amount I demand to fund my venture that I have in mind. So, and one of the things we're trying to do is bring more rigor to that conversation. Yeah, you know, what's the impact on quality, and how do you draw that straight line? And I'm sure David probably can give us some metrics that would help us do that, or some visual graphic indicators. But I mean, it's hard to map that. I mean, people saw with organic farming, there was a market impact on that. There was definitely some cost increases related to that, but now you can't sell wine in most places unless you can show that you are organically farming. I don't know what Virginia does with biodynamic. It was one of the most shocking things I learned about when I came into the wine industry. I thought they were making stuff up to test the ignorant Southerner when they started talking about planting the cow horn and farming by the moon cycles. But there's a lot of that being done out here, and some impact, I think, on fruit and quality. So I don't know, David.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And quality is so hard to define. Although,
Yeah.
we're fortunate to work with one winery that has several tiers of their wine prices. They've got a number of series.
Yeah.
And by doing precision farming, they were able to take one of their estate vineyards and raise it to a $10 per bottle retail more price point,
Wow.
which is $5 more to that winery through the three-tier distribution system. And what that ended up doing is giving them $15,000 more acre in terms of revenue coming from that vineyard. And so
like
you
that,
can
David.
show, that's as a small startup, software startup, it's like, well, you want us to give you this money. What's the return on investment is what every grower,
Right.
most people are frugal, but farmers to survive have to be frugal, right? And grape
That's
growers
right.
in the end are farmers. And so getting them, I have one person we haven't convinced to be a customer yet who said, I'd rather spend $10,000 on fertilizer every year than pay money on software because I know what I'm going to get from my fertilizer.
That's right.
So being able to get those examples, and so being able to work with people long enough, but you need to be able to have that. A lot of people don't have those multi-tiered programs. That tends to be larger. But if you take it to your reserve brand, right? If you don't have to buy grapes for your reserve brand, but your estate grapes grow up to that, then you save yourself a huge cost and you can get that higher quality value. And of course, reserve is just whatever you call it. There's no definition, just like old vines in versus not old vines. No wine terms, but there's no legal definition. However, everything on the front of the wine label in terms of AVA and alcohol percent and vineyard designate is all regulated, but beyond that, they can say whatever they want about it, right?
So the prices are more impacted by the marketing and the story that you're telling than they are by, I would say, direct connection to vineyard practices, except for organic or not, and the biodynamic labels and some of that stuff. People were really making a point of connecting to the earth, but I think the prices are really driven by your power to brand and storytell and suit the needs of whatever market you're trying to attract, and that's always the case whatever product you're trying to sell.
I had a conversation a few years ago with a friend who is owner of one of the larger wineries in Virginia, and we sat down and we went through the spreadsheet of costs. What did it cost to set up a winery? How do you start? All the factors, and the numbers stack up in terms of how much it costs to plant the vines, etc. And actually, the margins, if you just look at the numbers in that way, the margins are not too bad. I mean, they're pretty good. But
it's the cash. If you can fund the cash, the margins can be there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then you throw in the variable being weather, the climatic conditions,
production, yield.
And it's a very high risk business. And I'll give you an example. In Virginia, we had 3 frosts back to back. As the temperature is warming up, we had budding on the vines, and the 3 frosts hit and pretty much wiped out entire crops for many of the small wineries. So the point of of understanding where are you going to plant vines, what clones are you going to use, what are going to be more resistant to these changing climatic conditions. And that, David, as you're saying, understanding the soil type, the elevation, the aspect, all of that information when you're making that decision and saying, I'm going to plant this vine, but it's going to be 3 to 5 years before I see anything producing from that I can sell. That information and being precise about it, the more you know at the beginning, the better chance you have of managing the risk.
And I think what David offers also is repeatability and standardization, because I think for many years in our industry, we've had expertise that is in the brain of some brilliant vineyard manager. I mean, we have vineyard management companies that have accumulated expertise that can walk through a vineyard and see what's happening. Yeah. So we have a lot of this internalized expertise that David is helping bring more, external data and validation to. And we have these just, savants who know things, and it's very hard to bring in the next generation and replicate some of that and get that knowledge passed on fast enough.
It also, I think, with the the combination of science and arts, if the winemaker, the difference between a good winemaker and a great winemaker, in having all the information to be able to make that decision, if many of the things that can be automated are automated, then that leaves the winemaker more free to apply the creative skills,
do the fun stuff,
do the fun stuff. And I think that's the exciting opportunity ahead with all the technologies that are becoming available. I tell you, we have so many questions coming in.
I was going to say, one of the related questions was about, does a winemaker try to emphasize and make the best wine from the current growing conditions, or do they try to reproduce previous things? I think they want things in a range, but the wineries that I prefer personally are the ones who really try to bring out the characteristics of the vineyard and the harvest, but they don't want to have 30% of the crop of the grapes raisinate before they can pick them, because they start dehydrating because of overstressing them. They want them in a range, but they do really want to pull out those variations. And on the other hand, there's a very large winemaker that makes 16 different labels of wine, very large production, and the given winemaker for that given brand, he doesn't care what Cabernet grapes he gets. They don't take the individual vineyards of the tens of thousands of acres they farm and put them to each of the 14 labels. Whatever comes in the tanks free, that then goes to brand X this year. And the winemaker is trying to standardize to make it taste like what brand X tasted like last year. So there are both realms, and that is reassuring for a consumer, right? If you go in to buy your bottle of wine and you taste it and it's got way too much acid versus what you're used to drinking, you may not buy from that vineyard again. So it really is, again, that story and that relationship. And can you build that? Or are you just, someone wants to come home on, Thursday night and know that the glass of wine is going to taste just like the last one they bought?
So I think that's what we see in our estate clients, which is the majority. These small vineyards, these small wineries are primarily vineyard-driven wine that they're producing, and what their story is, at least is what they're telling us, is they're trying to get the best from that fruit in that year that's most reflective of that vineyard. So they are trying to manipulate the wine as little as possible each year and reflect the innate qualities. And those are the people who can command higher prices. Those are the ones who can price it whatever they think it'll hold and get it. And so that's what they're selling, is really this unmanipulated, authentic reproduction of what we're getting from the vineyard in that vintage. Now, whether that's really happening in the back, I don't know, but that's the story anyway.
There's and we've discussed a lot about the production side of things, the operation of the business, which is absolutely critical. And we've also talked about some of the consumer-driven, the demand-driven side of things. And there's also interesting developments there. I mentioned about education, that the general knowledge of a wine consumer is improving, and the reason for that is that there's more knowledge, more information available, whether it's through Google or Wikipedia, but also you have applications like Vivino, where you can capture information from the label of the bottle, and there's a growing base of information through Vivino that you can very informally educate yourself. Going into a restaurant, snap a picture of the wine list, and you've got a quick summary of an informed decision about the wine you want to have with your meal. Fantastic. So that's generally what's being referred to as virtual personal assistant. It's your personal sommelier. So there's interesting developments there. But in doing that, it's great. But then if the restaurant or the hotel has a wine waiter or sommelier whose knowledge is not up to par, then you're going to have an experience, the customer will have a lesser experience. So virtual personal assistants actually is pushing the industry to be better in terms of the service of wine for a better experience.
I think you have to mention 19 Crimes if you're talking about that, which has a whole virtual reality experience tied to the label.
Absolutely.
It's pushing us to all be innovative in terms of how we package and brand. If we want to reach these millennials, we got to do tricky things like that. It's really cool. If you haven't seen it, it's like so engaging. You can entertain the grandchildren who are running around by putting a bottle of wine with a storytelling on it, with an app. So, there's a lot of changes in all aspects of the business.
And there's the two other, because we've talked about there's the big market, there's the wines below $10 a bottle. That's is sort of the 80% 20% rule. But then there's also the fine wine market. So you have different buying community there. So there's technologies there that are aimed at provenance. If you're buying investment grade wine and spending hundreds, maybe thousands on a bottle, there's been a lot of wine fraud now. So there's a lot of technology going into protecting, whether it's spectral analysis to be able to assess that wine in the bottle actually is that wine.
And blockchain technologies are being applied to measure every step of the process of moving that product along. Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff happening there as well. Yeah, David, are you involved in any of those initiatives?
Well, I mean, I had managed a cybersecurity center at Purdue dealing with blockchain for a little while, but my colleague Christian Butzka actually did a lot of work on temperature and shipping conditions with the government of Chile, and they did a lot of studies even showing that if you ship a case of wine from California to the East Coast during the summer, it can actually age 2 to 5 years, and the temperature in the back of a UPS truck can hit 120 degrees. And what it does to that, they put samples in there. And so as I'm shipping my wine across the country right now in storage, I have a bunch of little USB temperature data loggers that I put in the shipment to see if that's the case. Because, these are things that are very important. You buy a wine at a winery, you ship it home, and you have no idea what conditions it's gone through and how that's changed the chemicals. Because the thing that I had found so fascinating is that wine is an unstable chemical reaction that's constantly going through reaction the entire time it's in the bottle, and it's all temperature driven and age driven. So you don't have something that's very stable there, and it's very interesting to see what people are trying to do with that. And I know several enologists who have always commented, you get an 80-year-old bottle of wine, no one knows what it should taste like. And was it an issue with the cork in that wine that it tasted a little different than the other one that was $10,000? I've had people tell me that they could create wines for spending $100 that people could indistinguish from, a $5,000 bottle. And there is, while a lot of people do try to minimally manipulate their wines, there are conditions, when you had the week of over 100 degrees in Napa 3 years ago, and Napa and Sonoma County, and, all the Pinot just went to shrivel up, and there were, really quick picks and all of this. These are conditions that people are going to have to do something to and do some manipulation in it. And, the great thing to the artist side of stuff is that most growers, when they're doing samples coming to harvest, even if they spend $200 per sample they send off to ETS for testing, they get 15 components of what are the measures of what's going on in the grape at harvest. And a grape has over 1,000 chemicals in it at harvest. And so they'll get two numbers that were the same, but you taste them. If you just do bricks and acid, I've been lucky to work during harvest, and you're tasting 5 samples from different vineyard blocks, and the bricks and TA are identical, and they taste completely different, right? Yeah. And, so it's that winemaker saying, you know, I've got this tank capacity, I need to turn them over. Which ones can I let hang for 5 more days until a tank clears out? Which one do I need to get in right away? What do the skins taste like and all this? And you could spend the money to do it all, but technology isn't cheap enough to really fully analyze stuff. So it's sort of like medicine. You can't get all of the data you need to make that diagnosis, is what the winemaker is dealing with there.
We've got a minute to go. We started a few minutes after 5, so if everyone's okay, we'll carry on for another another 5 minutes and try and get through the last of these questions. There's a couple of questions here that are not technology related, but one that I can address very quickly, and they're kind of related. One was what skills are required to get into the business side of wineries. If you're thinking of doing that, the old saying is, how do you make a small fortune in the wine business? You start with a large one. So that's
still true.
But what skills are required to get into the business side of wineries? The related question is, what's your favorite story of students that have sat for the WSET exam, Wine and Spirits Education Trust? Well, the business skills, I can talk to that directly because I made the choice to jump out of my world of technology into the world of wine. And I've spent a lot of my time, well, not a lot of my time, some of my time in mentoring young entrepreneurs. And one of the things that I learned is the fundamentals are all the same. I was thinking about all the differences, but you've got to know your market. You've got to know how to segment your market. You've got to know what you're producing, how that competes with other makers of wine. What are your points of differentiation? Because as I said, it's a commodity, but it's also a lifestyle. How did we position Virginia wines to sell Virginia wines in London? I mean, London is the heart of global wine industry. Most of the influencers in the wine world are British. So it's the toughest market to sell. So what did we do? We said, okay, we've got to go in with the best wines that will stand up. They don't, I can talk it up, but they've got to stand up by themselves. But they have to have a story behind them. So we tied in with, the Virginia British story, the history, the connection that enhanced that. So it's not all about what's in the bottle, it's the story behind the label. So what I would say, what skills are required? From a business standpoint, pay attention to the fundamentals. So if you lose sight of that and get tied up in the excitement and the mystique of wine, fundamentally it's an agricultural business.
But only making it, I think, to sort of highlight what you're saying, is making the wine is only a half or a third the battle. Right.
Selling it.
You've got hundreds of neighbors trying to sell something that's very similar. So it's extremely competitive.
Differentiation.
Yeah, absolutely. And the question about a story, I'll give you one story. I got a bunch of them, but the one story, we operate out of Choice, Richmond and Charlottesville. Those are the two areas that we focus on. One of the reasons for Richmond is it has been, and obviously current troubles has disrupted hospitality industry, but Richmond is a growing, changing city, and restaurants and the hospitality industry and the arts community have been a very significant part of that. But we decided that although there were a lot of interesting entrepreneurs that were opening new hotels, new restaurants, they could not find that middle tier of skills to find them and then retain them. So what we said is there needs to be a workforce development program, and that's what we set about doing. So one of the students was a barista at the Quirk Hotel in Richmond, if you know it, and just totally passionate about wine. We happened to be one block down from the Quirk. And he approached us and said, I'd love to do this, and this is what I'd love to do. I was to get more into wine. He went through all of the courses, worked damn hard. he passed with flying colors, with distinction. He worked his way through level 1, level 2, level 3. He is now a senior member of the team as a assistant som at Quirk. So I love that, because I mean, he's a great guy, but to see somebody so passionate and then armed with the right knowledge, the right skills, the right certification, gets to a point in his career where he really is going to take off. So that's one of my favorite stories. There's one more question. Do you think there's a market for an enzyme-based oxygen scavenger in the wine preservation bottling market? Any thoughts on that?
Not me. I have no clue, David. That sounded...
I mean, it's sort of interesting because a lot of people do, you know, they do spurging of the wine before bottling and put inert gas in there. And there's a lot of protection of trying to stop wine oxygen from getting in during the winemaking process. On the other hand, you know, there's people who do micro-oxygenation during fermentation to pull out some other things. So it would really depend. There are a lot of techniques people currently do now, from simple things like using dry ice in fermentation bins to create enough CO2 until you actually get fermentation going enough and things like this. But through the pipeline, I'm not sure what they're currently using as opposed to something that would go ahead and break down the oxygen. You know, feel free to follow up with an email, and I can put you in contact with my enologist I know who would be able to answer, would be able to talk to you about a half an hour of all the different things that are in the industry now, but I haven't heard anything specifically.
Well, on that note, we're just about 5 minutes past 7 now, so I think it's time to wrap up. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with everybody. So raise a glass to all of you, and
Iced tea.
continued success in whatever business you're in.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Hey,
Cheers.
I want to thank our panel. Thank you so much. If you haven't seen Jeannie's TEDx talk, please check it out.
Thank you.
If you haven't seen the work that David's doing with VenSense, but more importantly, the computer graphics and visualization work, check it out. And if you don't know what Chris is up to, please check out what he's doing with his wine business, but more importantly, what he's doing to really build up our entrepreneurial community here. If I had a significant or single takeaway for this entire event, it's that each one of our panelists and speakers are entrepreneurs, they're thought leaders, they're business people at heart, and there's so much that we can just take away from them. But more importantly, they're wine lovers, which goes a long, long way for me. So
Thank you.
all of you who took the time to join us tonight for our kickoff on Back to Biz. As always, you can find more information on this event and upcoming events on our website at mitefdc.org. Unless there's any additional parting words, I want to thank everybody again. I hope that you all have a great rest of your week. Please be safe. Please be kind to each other. And please come back for more. So
Thank you.
Thank
thank
you.
you all so much.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.